Hi everyone, I'm Sophie Shephard, APA titled Pain Physiotherapist. I'm very excited to be here at the 2026 APS conference doing some interviews on behalf of the APA, where I am very grateful to be joined by the amazing Felicity Braithwaite. Thanks so much for joining us, Flick.
No worries, great to be here.
We know each other a bit, but I'm wondering if, for the benefit of everyone who might be listening, if you could maybe share a little bit about your background and your work, just so we can get to know you.
Sure. So I am a pain researcher, of course have a background in physio. I've been researching pain for over 10 years now, I think. Finished my PhD in 2018 and really focusing on chronic musculoskeletal pain. One of my kind of passion areas at the moment is working with people living with osteoarthritis and debunking some of the common myths that are out there in society. Things like, exercise, it makes osteoarthritis worse. It's a wear and tear disease, which obviously we know is not true. It's actually one of the best things we can do for osteoarthritis. So yeah, I've been working with people living with osteoarthritis to kind of figure out ways of how we can debunk these myths and convince people that that is not true.
And you're here presenting, and your presentation was very much focused on this idea of narrative storytelling and the role that that can have in sort of helping to support that. I'd imagine that there's probably lots of different ways that that can look, and you're interested in digital storytelling particularly. Do you mind maybe just talking a little bit more about that, because it's such an interesting area?
As I just was talking about, I've been working with people with lived experience of osteoarthritis and asking them actually, like, how do we debunk these myths in the most effective way, and kind of asking them for their suggested strategies. And one of the things they told us most strongly was actually hearing people's stories and testimonials and kind of their success stories with using best practice non-surgical management as a way of inspiring their own behaviour change. So that's how I kind of got into the area of storytelling, and I've really become fascinated by it because it is just such a universal way that we humans make sense of the world, and it's such a powerful mode of communication. And I think it is much more powerful than things like group level statistics or, you know, the ways we tend to deliver information to people in the world. I think, storytelling's a real area of untapped potential that we need to kind of harness and use to improve pain care.
Because it's almost like coming back to that, just that very like human aspect of care, isn't it? Because it's like sitting there and listening to people's stories and being able to connect with other people. It's just so powerful. I know we could probably talk about it for quite a while, but I'm interested in terms of maybe some of the potential, I guess, mechanisms or reasons why we think, I mean, intuitively it maybe makes sense, but what are some of the potential mechanisms as to why this might be so powerful?
That is what we're trying to figure out at the moment. There's actually not a lot of research in the pain space on the power of storytelling yet. It's a very emerging area, but we have been looking at other areas of health, and we're actually working on drafting a conceptual mechanistic model that we can test these mechanisms and figure out actually what makes a story land for people living with pain. And some of the things we've been thinking about are things like, you know, pain, particularly chronic pain, is an invisible condition normally. So it can really make chronic pain more visible, more credible, people feel more validated. And I think another really powerful area of storytelling with like a really huge potential is using it to deliver challenging concepts about pain. When we're, you know, if I'm going back to the myths, we are challenging people's deeply held beliefs about their bodies, and that can backfire. You know, people can feel dismissed, disbelieved and invalidated when we're doing that if we don't do it well. But if it's coming from someone with a shared lived experience, I think there's much more chance of that not backfiring and that actually going well, and maybe getting people to think a little bit differently about their pain.
Because there is such a power dynamic when you're talking about a health professional and a patient, and that's even with, you know, the best clinician who's very empathetic and supportive, you never quite get around that element of the power dynamic as well. So it sounds like it could be a really helpful and valuable thing there. I'm interested, you know, we've kind of highlighted already that there's potentially quite a few benefits to why we might want to pursue this and how it might be helpful. What do you see as maybe being some of the barriers or challenges when we're talking about exploring this area and maybe putting things in practice?
Yeah, this is a great question. It's something we're really thinking carefully about as well as we put together our conceptual model, is kind of avoiding things that could put particularly the storyteller in danger. We really need to prioritise their emotional safety and their health. Some of the things we've been thinking about is we've been developing an ethical framework around that and making sure that they're in a place where they can relive their story. Because I think an important element of storytelling is talking about the challenges and the adversity and overcoming that. Yeah, to get people to really engage with the story and see the potential for their own change as well. So we need to make sure we've got people that are in a place that they're able to do that without making things worse for themselves. We also have to think about things like ongoing consent. So having the storyteller really involved in every decision that we're making when we're using their story, from drafting what they're going to say in their story, through to editing, through to where it's going to be shared. So, they've got really a lot of control over that. Because I think one thing that I do worry about is, you capture a story and you put it out there into the world, and then things might change for that person. And so just making sure they're fully aware of those risks, because once it's out there, it's very difficult to get it back. You can't really get it off the internet, can you? So
absolutely, and I'd imagine there's an element to just, for any research, but particularly this sort of research, it's also about making sure that we're being mindful to not potentially risk maybe exploiting participants, and making sure it's actually for their benefit rather than just extracting. I know there's been a lot of really great work happening generally in health research around that space, and it sounds like what you're saying is really kind of tying into some of that as well, around just protecting them and making sure, everything's in place. So that ethical framework sounds like it's going to be really important moving forward.
Yeah, and I think another great thing about storytelling is, one challenge is that you're capturing a person's story, it's inherently going to be identifiable, so we can't have the same sort of confidentiality that we have with normal research ethics and things like that. But I think that brings opportunities, because it means that the storyteller can actually be credited for their contribution to knowledge translation, and they're actually central to that knowledge translation, which I think is really important and powerful, and we can acknowledge them as co-authors and part of the research team in a much more effective way, I think. And, I think we always try and do that anyway with all of our research. When we're working with people with lived experience, we do involve them as part of the research team from the outset. And so storytelling, I think, is a really nice way of getting them out there and making sure they're credited for what they're providing and gifting us with their story.
I think a really strong theme that's been throughout the rest of this conference has been a lot more discussion around, social determinants, and also thinking about facets of identity and experience that might contribute to experiences of marginalisation, and knowing that there are certain communities of people who may be excluded from research or often have their voices go unheard. I'm interested to hear, where you see this sort of vehicle of research that you're working on. Is there potential application, or how might that sort of help with elevating some of those voices? Yeah,
it's a huge area that we're looking into with this work as well, is, making sure that we are capturing the voices of underrepresented people. I think digital stories in particular have this really great potential to reach people that are potentially marginalised and don't get heard from a lot, and we can actually capture those stories and share them within those communities as well, to build connection and solidarity within those communities. And I think really amplify those underrepresented voices. And I think it also has benefits around things like, access to healthcare might be not as easy in sort of low middle income settings, for example. I think a story showing success with self-management, for example, like, exercise, physical activity, all of those things, could be really powerful for people who are having issues with access and might not even be aware of these options as a strategy that could help them.
So it sounds like this is going to be a really exciting area, particularly, thinking about researchers as, different ways they might start to think about, harnessing different perspectives and bringing that into their work. So it'll be really exciting to see where that goes. Knowing that we're going to have probably quite a few clinicians who are listening to this, I'm interested in maybe not necessarily the direct output of your work so far, because I know there's probably going to be some really useful stuff that comes from it sort of further down the track that might be clinically applicable, but from some of the learnings of your work so far, what might be one thing that would be helpful for any clinicians listening to be able to take away from what you've learned in doing this work?
I think a lot of clinicians would be doing this anyway, but I think even just sharing a story from, if you've had a patient that's had great success with a management strategy that you have been helping them, coaching them through. I think that is really powerful. As I said at the beginning, there's just something about a good story. There's something really special that people tend to listen to, and I think if the person truly identifies with the person in the story and thinks that person is in a similar situation as me and they've had this successful outcome, that can be really powerful. So, even just talking to our patients about these success stories, I think is a really powerful strategy. But yeah, I do hope to capture some really inspirational stories as well and build kind of a repository as well. And I think one of my goals too is to publish these stories alongside papers that we publish, because papers don't reach patients. Like that, it's not an effective way of disseminating these outcomes to the people that need them. So yeah, that's one of our goals at the moment, is to publish these little kind of case study stories alongside our papers that clinicians can actually use in their sessions.
I'm very excited to see that come out, because that's something that I'll very much be looking forward to being able to put in practice in my own practice. So yeah, definitely let me know when that happens. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Flick. Thank you for taking the time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference, and thank you everyone for tuning in.
Thanks so much for having me.